Hello, thanks for joining me on my second devlog. So as said in my previous devlog, I'm working on an RPG game with my own engine. And this month I've added a bunch of stuff, namely a map editor, collision detections, and monsters, as well as their sensory system and behavior. But first, I'm still not finished working on the character animations, so after suffering from drawing the same damn guy over and over again, I gave up and started working on collision detection. Actually, before working on the collision detection, I'm gonna give this menu a background real quick. So I drew this dark sky and bright sky background for the menu, and here's the final result. Anyway, back with the collision detection stuff. My collision detection system has two basic shapes, push segments and push spheres. And from those two shapes, I can create any hitbox I want. As the name suggests, the push segments and the push spheres push the object away when they detect collision. Those aren't spheres, they're circles. But spheres sound cooler, so shut up! The push segment pushes the object away in a certain predefined direction. This means that the push segments will only block the object on one side. If the object is on the other side, it's gonna be teleported to the right side when it collides. And that isn't a flaw. That's an intended feature. I saw some games that block both sides and ended up having some stuff stuck inside the wall when it bugs. And if I want something that blocks both sides, I can just have another push segment on top that has a push direction pointing the other way. The push spheres is pretty simple. It just pushes the object away from its midpoint. Yeah, it's very simple. That's exactly why I created it, even when I can just create a circle using the push segments. It's better optimized that way. The next thing I work on is the map editor. This is probably the worst map editor in the world. It's so damn hard to even understand what the hell those buttons do, and it doesn't even have a proper input field. It uses the damn console for reading numbers and text. But I'm the only one using it anyway, so there's no need to make it easier to use. Actually, I still give it some upgrades to make it easier to use. Just some simple improvement though. For instance, when I want to highlight something in the editor, I have to click highlight and then type the object ID on the console. That's slow and hard to use because when I forget the ID, I basically have to do it over and over again until I get the right ID. So I upgraded it a bit. Instead of having to find the object using the console, you can now click the object on screen to select it. Nope, I just always highlight the first object in the catalog so that if I want to select an object, I can just scroll around and find the one. I'm such a genius. No, you're just lazy. Other than that, I made it so that I can just press a button on the keyboard instead of finding the right damn button on this list of nonsense buttons. With this map editor can place objects, floors and environmental hitboxes, and it seemed to work quite fine. But what's the point of a map editor when you cannot open or save the map file? And so I started working on the map reader and writer. And it's done. Look at this map file. It's confusing. I encoded it to make the file size smaller, but looking at how damn small this is, I probably done some pretty redundant thing. Well, at least it's smaller and faster to load. And then I added monsters to the game, and the first monster is the slam. Yes, probably the most basic monster. All it does is jump toward the player. Most of the time it will jump past the player, but if you're not careful, they can land on you, or you can hit them by accident and take contact damage. Other than that, I added goblins, animals, trees, and excuse me? Wait a minute, is that Yoda? Well, I like this guy the most. He's just a combination of a boar and a goblin, but he's still amazing. And I also got this guy, but he's unfinished. He's a big goblin. Yes, he's actually a goblin, not an orc. Right now, the enemies will just follow you without being aware of the surroundings, and so they bump into trees and stuck there like an idiot, so I made a sensory system for them. Here's how it works. Check if the player is inside his vision range, and then check if the line connecting the player and the enemies is colliding the environment. If that line is colliding with the environment, it means that the player is hidden behind something and the enemy cannot see the player. And to make the enemies feel less like an idiot, instead of making the enemy stop whenever the player is out of its vision, I made them remember the last position where they saw the player and walk toward it. This means that if you walk behind a tree, they will try to move behind the tree to check if they're there. For ranged enemies, their behavior will be completely different. Initially, I wanted them to run in a circle around the player, but that will create some hard to predict movement patterns when the player moves. So instead, I just want the enemy to target a random point around the player, stay at that point, attack the player for a few seconds, and then repeat. Well, I do have some other behaviors for special enemies, but there's a rule that all enemies must follow. They must be easily predictable. This means that all of their intentions must be shown on their face, their movements should be easy to predict, and there must be pauses in between their actions, like when they've switched from running away to attacking. They must stay idle for a short amount of time so that you don't startle when they suddenly turn back and attack you. Also, I like to have the enemies move in a straight line instead of an arc. This is because if they move in an arc, it would be very hard to know where they're trying to reach. Of course, with a few exceptions like when they move toward a moving object or an entity, because you know exactly what they're chasing after in those cases. There are many other ways I can do to make fighting enemies feels more interesting, but I won't be covering them just yet, since I haven't made any. Sorry about that. Those other behaviors won't be applied to all enemies though, because you probably don't want them all to feel the same, right? Well, anyway, that's all for this devlog. If you're asking why you're not seeing any enemy dying or getting hurt, that's because my combat system is still unfinished. Yeah, I got time to draw the enemies and their death animations, but did not even implement a proper combat system to even use them. I'm a freaking idiot, I know. But I'll work on that soon, so you should subscribe and wait for my next video if you want to see those fights in action. Alright, see ya soon.